Look, we gave you your chance to let you have your moment and you blew it. Sakura, come show these people a true force to be reckoned with. From Fate Stay Night, we know through Sakura being in the worm pit that she has stronger mental strength than Zoken expected. Just being able to function after having her body tampered with by Zoken for 10 years is a feat of its own. In the Prismaverse, we saw her take a dirk through the upper body from Shinji and survive. In Heaven's Field, we saw that she can completely heal Rider of all of her injuries. Her shadow whips can act in the form of blades and change directions at the last second. After becoming a member of the Mato household, she now specializes in absorption, being able to pry ridiculous amounts of energy from her target. She has access to a unique ability to share vision with her servant Medusa. She has the same amount of magic circuits as Ren, those naturally being high quality due to their background. At the school, we saw that she can summon shadow spike balls in the midst of confusion. We know that she's the one that created the false book for Shinji that allowed him to control Rider. In Hollow Ataraxia, we found that she can create barriers through the teachings of Medusa. In Hollow Ataraxia, we saw Sakura utilize her main magecraft, imaginary numbers, against the shade spirits. Using this, she can literally create a vortex that swallows her targets and sends them to the underworld if her power allows it. Though she's not the biggest fan of it, she can bring her darkness to the surface and use it to become a magus temporarily. In Heaven's Field, she tells Shiro how she was aware that Gil was tracking her. By the powers of her shadow, you had Ku being held captive in his fight against Hassan. Her shadow whips were strong enough to completely immobilize Heracles, who has some of the greatest strength in the war. We saw this again in his fight against Salter, the whips even bringing him to her. These same whips were enough to land a fatal attack on Emiya and toss him to the side. Using her absorption specialty, the shadow can take in all of the magical energy that's around it and unleash it as a devastating attack. This alone was enough to cause great damage to the area, bring Emiya down to his final reserves, and make Shiro lose his entire arm. The story itself telling us that even Shiro survived out of pure luck. Of course he did. With the help of the shadow, she straight up bodied Shinji after being fed up with his torturing in Heaven's Field. Through her powers, it was able to destroy the entire Ironsburn castle. She can use her shadow whips to grab hold of her target if necessary. She was able to find and eliminate one of Zoken's core worms that monitor her body, this being Zoken himself. You going out sad, Zoken, fight back. As a defense mechanism, we saw the shadow whips pierce Ren in the stomach when she finally caught up to Sakura. Her whips can come out as a countless amount of projectiles at one time, making Shiro perform some of the highest level of agility to survive them. In a bad end, we saw her rip Ilya apart and literally mince her body into pieces. Using this, we also saw Shiro get his entire body ripped open, his rib cage being compared to a flower blooming. In the story, we saw Gilgamesh butcher her entire body, and not only did she survive, but she swallowed Gil whole like nothing happened. The shadow even showing a unique ability of her regenerating through magical energy and bringing her body back to its original form. It has great speed, being able to cover a distance faster than Emiya can retaliate. In just a matter of seconds, it was able to pierce Emiya and apply its curse. In the fight against Medea, we saw her shadow absorb Medea's entire fireball, this same fireball being implied to be an Age of Gods level spell. Without any effort involved, it can absorb the remains of other spirits. By combining all of his runes, Cucullin can make a defense that can block a high level phantasm. And even then, the shadow was still strong enough to penetrate and swallow him whole. Saber herself mentions that it would be easier to go against Heracles than taking her shadow head on. Through Zoken's tampering and fragments from the last war, she can function as a holy grail. Just like the other servants, she eventually took down Cursed Arm Hassan as well. She was easily able to drain the energy of the people in Fuyuki, this further being depicted by her slurping on their body parts like some boneless wings. The mass influence that she had over Fuyuki allowed her to knock the power out all through the city. Just coming in contact contact with the Shadow's whips is said to make people ill. The story tells us that the Shadow causes shortness of breath. Even an adult male can go down in one night. She straight up swallowed Gil's phantasms and shot them out right behind her in a similar fashion to Gate of Babylon. It tells us that literal hundreds of people were turned into magical energy without even leaving their homes. Ren explains to us that this effect works like Medusa's blood for phantasm on a completely different scale with no prep time. The story tells us that this allows her to consume the body and soul of the average person instantly. She was able to invade Ren's magic circuits and start to consume her energy. Just Shiro touching the residual parts of the curse was able to stun his entire body. Her shadow giants can be used to capture the enemy, taking a hold of Shinji and Hollow Ataraxia. In a bad end, you have her shadow swarming around Shiro, ripping off his limbs and completely dissolving his body. In another end, you have the shadow take away Shiro's eyesight and absorb him into a sea of darkness with his conscience still intact. You have the end where the shadow melts Ren, Ilya, and Shiro back to back before they have time to do anything about it. You have the infamous ending Fin Fatale, where Sakura brings Ren into her world, consumes her whole, and has her suffer the same worm torture that she did growing up for an eternity. She is moving wicked. Her shadow giants can be used to consume her targets as well, taking Shiro's life in no time on top of that. The story tells us that the reason that the shadow becomes so strong is because Sakura combines the talents of both the Mato and the Tosaka households, that being the Mato's binding and her shadow abilities from her origin, imaginary numbers. In Heaven's Field specifically, we know that her magical energy is infinite and her capacity is at least 100 million. She tells us herself that she's the only one that can get rid of her shadow. By having so much power, the story regards her on the same level as the Counter Guardians. Similar to Gilgamesh, she's given the servants under her wing their own bodies and they have to maintain physical form. Once again, it tells us that she's a bottomless well for magical energy, giving a nod to her abundant supply. Ren herself mentions that the people at the clock tower would pass out if they came across Sakura's ridiculous output, saying that just the amount of energy that she used in their fight alone would be enough to power an entire department for 100 years straight. From their battle, we know that her supply at least rivals a projection of the gem sword of Zelrech. The story tells us that Sakura's energy eventually reaches 1 trillion and that it couldn't even be used in an entire lifetime. Her max output with no prep time only being 1,000. Herc himself realized that he was no match for Sakura's shadow giant. We know that her shadow familiars can make themselves colossal on demand whenever it's deemed necessary. Again, just the magical energy of one giant alone is enough to rival a servant's noble phantasm. She can transport herself to different locations via her familiars. Her shadow has been shown having a level of spatial warping, using it as a vehicle to get around as she pleases. Its power was enough to overcome Heracles and alter his body. Through her connection, she can disperse her shadow at a great range as if it was grail mud. As the predetermined mother to Angra Mainyu, she had complete authority over Kirei, being able to crush his fake heart, putting his life on a timer, and twist his body as if it was a rag doll. In a similar fashion to her familiars, she can transport through her whips. Once she has access to enough energy, her spiked balls can replicate a minefield. She has great instincts, being on the same level as Ren. Again, the story tells us about her shadow distorting space. Just Shiro walking in line with it was enough to make him lose consciousness. In Heaven's Field, you had Nasu agree that Sakura outscales Kirei 10-0 due to her authority. Then you have her pseudo-servant variant where she's fused with the Hindu mother goddess Parvati. In the Oku event, we've seen her land great damage on the beast Kama alongside Munenori. She has a 3-pronged spear complementary of her husband Shiva that allows her to cast lightning at will. Again, Shiva being a primordial deity and the spear still maintaining its EX value despite being in her possession. She can manifest shockwaves that damages the targets that's around her. Her lightning can be manipulated into a blast for better precision when she attacks. You have her other pseudo-servant variant where she's fused with the third beast of humanity, Kama. Prior to us getting the upper hand, she straight up tanked Munenori, who's an expert swordsman with no effort at all. In the event specifically, she had the power to fluctuate gravity at will. She takes this even further by showing us she can erase gravity entirely. Due to her conceptually being the universe, she has complete authority over everything in her domain. She can take flight and teleport whenever she feels like it. She can outright clone herself if she needs to, and these aren't just some cheap knockoffs, the replicas being direct copies of her original self. Again, due to her being the universe, it's shown that she can clone an infinite amount. She can remove oxygen under her domain. She told us herself that she could just one-shot us all if the story wasn't holding her back. You have her role in the Prismaverse, where she operates as a doll under the Ainsworths. Using the Berserker card, she was able to take the form of Lancelot, steal Shiro's overedge sword, and slice him directly through the stomach. This was thanks to Lancelot's phantasm, Knight of Honor. She can do this with nearly any weapon she touches. Even when Miyu tried to spam her from behind with Gil's Gate of Babylon, Sakura was able to dodge multiple phantasms at once and caught the rest of them in her hands with ease. She tactfully tornadoed her weapon to deflect even more attacks. Her overwhelming skill and power was enough to disarm Kuro. She can install shadow cards and use them as projectiles to hold down her enemy. She can produce a black mist that protects her during battle thanks to her origin. Despite having parts of her body immobilized, she was able to block Kuro and Miyu at the same time with this mist. She was able to absorb Miyu's include effect and used it against them, causing paralysis. We've seen Sakura use her shadow whips to pick up part of a bridge and block Miyu's blast. She has great reflexes, being able to limbo dodge Kuro's rule breaker and steal it from her. On top of that, she straight up tanked a direct attack from the Phantasm Gaebol due to her not having a functioning heart. Good old Gaebol jobs again. Strong phantasm, by the way. Due to her origin, she can create shadow balls of water that can lead to massive explosions. She tanked a fatal arrow from Shiro by taking it straight through the hand. She caught Shiro's arrow at the last second and retaliated by piercing him with it. She was easily able to disarm Shiro and kick him dead in the face. Not only did she tank an entire grenade from Shiro, but she also manipulated her shadow whips to block several shots from Kirisugu's Calico. When you finally get Sakura going, she's pretty ruthless. While other people were out here with their freedom, she was stuck in a basement for 10 years and she's still putting up numbers. Had she been properly trained, then this wouldn't even be fair. She has one of the most unique origins that make her extremely versatile. Her circuits are top notch and she's constantly going past her limits. When it comes to her rank, at least in Stay Night, canonically she's clearly an EX, but if we're going in without the influence of Angra, she's somewhere around a B. Usually she's getting possessed by something else, so it kind of makes the waters a bit muddy. Parvati, Kama, Angra, the Sakura 5, even in the Prismaverse she's getting bolstered by Lancelot. Of course she's gonna be good. Let my girl have her own depictions. Give us a post-Ataraxia Sakura so we can see what she's working with.